Much has been said about the strangeness of breakfast cereal as a concept. Products that are tantamount to candy soup with little nutritional value have, for decades, been sold as an essential component of the most important meal of the day, using colorful cartoon characters scientifically formulated to be as appealing to malleable young minds as possible.
Get out of the sleeper with Fruity Pebbles, a fruity punch.
Do you remember those weird commercials for Frosted Mini Wheats that pretty much claimed that they would make you smarter? That you should chow down on a big bowl before a big test or exam?
A clinical study showed kids who had a filling breakfast of Kellogg's Frosted Mini Wheat cereal had 11% better attentiveness compared to kids who missed out on breakfast.
Yeah, you think?
As stupid as it sounds, I 100% believed it as a kid. Do you want to know who didn't believe it? The FTC, who sued Kellogg's for misleading advertising practices. Legitimately, an arm of the American government had to step in and tell them to knock it off. And they aren't the only ones. Since 2016, the use of child-targeted advertising on products that don't meet certain nutritional guidelines has been prohibited in certain regions of Latin America, most especially Chile. One could make a very convincing argument that breakfast cereal is pretty high up there in regards to what could be considered the most evil consumer products ever to be sold, and yet people like me just can't get enough of them.
Cereal time, cereal time, cereal time, whoa.
What's up, cereal heads? Today we're going to talk about new green onion Chex cereal from South Korea. Oh, yeah, that's not good at all.
Perhaps that's the result of a lifetime of commercial brain rot, but for all that has been said of both cereal and its marketing being poisonous to body and mind, what if these circumstances were a bit more literal? Now, you may have seen this post floating around from Discontinued Foods on the website formerly known as Twitter. They also have a Blue Sky account if you'd like to check that out.
Buttercups cereal, 1965 circa 1967. Puffed, light, crispy, flower-shaped corn cereal pieces from General Mills. A commercial featured children picking and eating real-life buttercups, which are
poisonous,
which led to parental complaints of copycat behavior.
Interesting for sure, and a completely plausible advertising faux pas. For a more recent example, look to Lego Fun Snacks from 2008. Released by Kellogg's and designed to look like the famous building blocks, some online felt that they set a dangerous precedent by teaching kids to eat Lego, which feels like a bit of an overreaction. If that's a legitimate fear for you, then you've at the very least lost the right to make fun of the US government for banning Kinder Eggs. The fact that we've seen similar snacks emerge in recent years with little to no fanfare is enough to tell me that the gun might have been jumped. Regardless, things like this have happened, and recently too. I had no reason to doubt the story about Buttercups, and naturally I wanted to see this killer commercial for myself. But it wasn't on YouTube, or the Internet Archive, or anywhere. Now, that's more than a little bit of a roadblock, but it's not like this is unprecedented. Advertising is one of the most poorly preserved forms of media, because it's the thing that most of us skip. We get up to go to the bathroom, we splice them out of VHS recordings. Nobody wants to see them unless it's the Super Bowl or they legitimately can't anymore. Add in the fact that this was the 60s, where home recording technology was practically light years away, that spells disaster for you at Sacrifice. Not wanting to ring the lost media alarm just yet, I figured that the next most logical course of action would be to look into whatever remains of this brand as a whole. There was just one small issue with that, though. Pretty much nothing does. General Mills' website is devoid of any mentions of it, and it's not even included on a list of their products on Wikipedia. There's a small mention of it on the list of breakfast cereals page, but no reference and certainly no corresponding page. Now, you might immediately be thinking the obvious, that this is a hoax or some kind of a creepypasta, but no. There is solid evidence of the existence of Buttercups that comes in the form of a 1982 report by the Federal Trade Commission. They were real.
Don't exist.
Disregarding Facebook posts, I found about 4 web pages, and one of them was the aforementioned Twitter post from late 2024. Now, the least dubious of this selection was a listicle published by MeTV, an actual broadcast company. The brief mention of the cereal does not touch upon much that the tweet didn't already, but what isn't present is arguably more interesting. There's no mention of a commercial here. Now, the author does bring up the toxic nature of the Buttercup flour as a potential reason for the product being pulled, but there's no commercial mentioned. Commercial is mentioned in the Tumblr post from General Mills History that the MeTV article cites, and that Tumblr post cites Mr. Breakfast's cereal project, which is where our little chain of command ends, actually. In regards to resources available for Buttercup cereal, it appears that this is the definitive one. Given that the page contains a photo uploaded on March 13th of 2008, it can be presumed that this was the date it went up, so this is definitely the earliest available source on our current timeline. Weirdly, over 500 of the site's users have voted it as the greatest cereal of all time. That's a lot for a product this elusive, but it's worth mentioning that even cereals that never released seem to have fandoms in some measure. The comments are full of 5-star ratings and people fondly reminiscing over the discontinued product, but there's something else that's worth a look within them.
I don't know what Buttercup cereal tasted like, but they happened to like the snack that General Mills also used to have called Daisies.
Interesting. Test marketed in 1964, but widely released in 1966, Daisies launched alongside 2 other snack foods, Bugles and Whistles. It's likely that you've heard of the former, but not the latter, and it's for the reason that you'd expect. Though General Mills claims that their advertising campaign for the trio of products had been one of the most expensive and expansive to date in an article that is now only available through the Wayback Machine, Daisies and Whistles failed to make a splash. Bugles are still available for purchase today, while the others were discontinued fairly quickly, Whistles in 1972 and Daisies in 1967. As pointed out by Ken, Daisies and Buttercups share a lot of visual similarities, and perhaps even use the same pieces. This was the 1960s after all. The decade was all about flower power and also crimes against humanity. It makes sense that they might want to double down on a lucrative theme, especially if it meant cutting production costs at the same time. Daisies are a little less mysterious than Buttercups, and you can find that General Mills still readily acknowledges them to this day, if it provides them with a decent opportunity to shill for Bugles. They're still not easy to dig up info on, and most of the accounts available are of the I remember them but never tried them variety. Largely unremarkable stuff. There is an exception to this, however. A commenter named Joe on a website for 1970s nostalgia, who claims that his aunt mistook the snacks for cereals and forced him to eat them with milk and sugar.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Now, if you're anything like I am, you may be starting to make some connections here, but there's something else that I want to touch on real quick. The General Mills history blog refers to Buttercups as honey-kissed flowers, while MeTV highlights their concave honeycomb shape. Why is this noteworthy? Well, guess what cereal also released in 1965? One that, judging by the fact it is still around to this very day, saw far greater success. One that, if we are concerned with protecting the children, should have probably also seen its advertising pulled from the airwaves.
Strawberry blaster honeycomb!
We don't have all of the pieces, but it's fairly easy to begin putting together a facsimile of the full picture. From my perspective, things played out thusly. Buttercups and Daisies launched in 1964 by General Mills in select markets to test their viability, hence the lack of information and advertising materials available for the latter. With two products of near identical nature, General Mills aimed to determine which of them would prove more lucrative. Because of competition from Honeycomb and possibly concerns raised by its branding, Buttercups proved to be the less popular of the two. Daisies made it to mass market, while Buttercups were left to languish in obscurity, even if the relative success of the saltier variety was very short-lived, being the first of the three products in its family to be discontinued. Both products being available at the same time would explain why Joe's aunt would be so convinced that Daisies were a cereal product, and a company releasing dueling products in a test market isn't uncommon. Buttercups were released to a limited market and thrown to the wolves thanks to competition from Post's Honeycomb and from its own evil doppelganger, as well as potentially the backlash of its own poor marketing. There's even a comment on Mr. Breakfast's article that I came dangerously close to overlooking, which pretty much seals the deal here.
As a small child, I remember eating this cereal back in the late 60s. The Buttercups cereal was my favorite. It was sold in a test market was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My school had us try this cereal and Honeycombs by Post. I picked the Buttercups cereal because it was not as sugary as the Post Honeycombs. I liked the texture and the taste. I wish that they would bring it back and test market it in the Boise, Idaho area. I know many people would try it and also love it.
Now, as a side note, it should go without saying that I wrote most of that theory before I discovered this comment, because on this channel we make mountains out of molehills. Now, obviously, I can't say that this is definitively how things unfolded, but I find it to be a very reasonable and thorough theory. That just leaves one question. Where's the commercial? Well, there are really only two possible answers to that question. It exists or it doesn't. For the doesn't exist angle, I'm going to defer to a bit of circumstantial evidence. Lyndon B. Johnson's infamous Daisy advertisement released in 1964, and it features some very similar imagery. That's a close enough time frame for somebody's wires to get crossed and connect some unrelated mental dots. Also, the general lack of evidence or reporting is obviously enough to raise suspicions. Now, one could argue that it wouldn't make sense to air a television advert for something that was only test marketed, but I disagree. For one, there's no definitive proof that it never hit the markets, it just seems very likely, and secondly, television used to be much more important on a local scale. The national marriage between networks was nowhere near as cohesive as it is in the modern day. You still see local commercials today, so why is it a stretch to suggest that General Mills may have produced a few decades ago? For the does exist camp, where did the claims come from? I feel it's unlikely that somebody as clearly dedicated to his hobby as Mr. Breakfast would pull such a specific claim out of his cereal bowl, so there had to have been some prior origin. Perhaps this was some kind of urban legend of the early web that has since been lost to time, but I'm not quite sure. Additionally, one of the more recent comments on the article is from a user who recalls both the presence of a dog and a specific chunk of narration that obviously is not present in the Lyndon B. Johnson commercial. I really don't know what to think of all of this because it's hearsay all around no matter what position you take. It's like the diabetic version of Hitagata. It should go without saying that I will be keeping my eyes peeled for any new information that may surface, especially if it's in direct response to this video, but until then, there's only one thing I can say with any real amount of certainty.
Oh, yeah, that's not good at all.
where I live.